Hello and welcome to the program. I'm David Holmes. My guest tonight is Dhammaji, who is a non-monastic minister in Buddhism, and his name actually means teacher of noble truth. And he's speaking to me from his home in North Carolina. Hi Dhammaji, and a very warm welcome to the program.
Very good, thank you, very good.
And you're currently living in North Carolina, is that right?
Yes, I'm in central North Carolina.
But you're originally from Virginia.
That's correct.
And I'm just interested, we'll develop into the talking on Buddhism soon, but how you progressed. Did you have sort of a formal religious life, or was that something, a strong interest in the family, or just was it anything mainstream religion situation?
Yes, religion was somewhere in the background. It was part of my experience. Most of my life, I cannot really necessarily trace the influence of religion to the present experience that I call awakening or spiritual practice. But certainly there's some conditioning in my life related to religion, and I'm sure many of the listeners have some faith influence or faith background.
Yeah. And you say that you were philosophically curious. Was that just an interest in, or an introspective look at whatever you were doing? Did you always feel that there was something else or something you were progressing towards? Or?
Yes, I suppose it was a contemplative influence coming from within that, of course, at the time I didn't identify it necessarily as that. A philosophy professor once called me a daisy painter. I believe that means you tend to look at things through rose-colored glasses, if you will.
Maybe an optimist. There's several different ways of looking at it, but I'm sure you had a different opinion than what he did. I suppose that's something inevitable about our growing up, isn't it? We have a certain path, and then someone will question that. But I think that's good in a sense, in the long run. Maybe not comfortable at the time, but it makes you inquire more deeply into what you're about.
There's a continuity to being that we have as a child, as a young person, that as we grow older becomes interrupted the more conditioning that we take on, and the more of a sense of identity or belief systems and that sort of thing that we take on. That continuity of being becomes interrupted. And I think if we take time, most of us can look back to our childhood. Perhaps we can remember a time maybe we laid in the grass and just enjoyed the sensation and the freshness of being, or perhaps watching clouds or stars at night, that sort of thing, where there was no sense of that being about me as a person, but just rather alive to that moment, alive to that presence. So looking back, I can find a lot of those experiences that were very meaningful. And I found that as I grew older, that I had to actually consciously reach for those moments and recognize those moments and take advantage of them.
Right. So did you have a belief in God from a very early age? What were your recollections about what you thought about?
Yeah, I took God for granted.
Right.
It seemed to be that God was an explanation or shorthand for anything that we didn't understand. We attributed to God or some greater power. And I just assumed that, and that was my definition. And I think that's a good way to explain a lot of mysterious things. A lot of the questions, the deeper questions that we have, are easily explained that way.
Yeah.
I don't think we should take that for granted.
No. But you had quite a regular church life, and you went to Bible college, so you had maybe a keen interest in pursuing that path. Was there any particular motivation, or was that something you felt it was right for you for no particular reason? Or...
Well, here again is one of those moments of clarity or moments of contemplation, if you will, where there just seemed to be a deeper, uh, a personal recognition or personal presence of the divine or spirituality in the person of Christ, because that was the religious background that I had at the time.
Yeah.
And I became very passionate to that and very alive to it, and pursued that as a way of life and allowed that to develop.
Yeah.
And had a very profound realization, if you will, in that faith tradition.
Yeah. So did that happen over a period of time? Was there a particular moment when you feel you were? Some people call it an aha moment, where a light goes on, but quite often it's more gradual than that, and you move into.
Well, I think this is something that everyone needs to look at. We grow to a place where we really reach the end of ourself. I reached a place at the end of myself where I became disenchanted with my experiences, my worldly surroundings, the kind of company and environment, and the way life played out, like that sort of thing. Just become worn out by it and have a deeper longing. And it was during that sort of feeling or that sort of situation that I felt the voice of God to me speaking to me, if you will.
Yeah.
So yes, there was a sort of a profound moment. I think that in a larger sense, that moment is always there for us.
Yeah.
And this is what the contemplative life and contemplative spirituality, Buddhism in particular, but all the wisdom traditions are pointing at this this introspection,
Right.
that supersedes ideas and beliefs and goes right to the heart.
Yeah.
So yes, there was a heart moment experience, and it was really then that it set me on that path towards serious spiritual life.
What was your very earliest recollection of contact with Buddhism?
Well, I searched in a lot of different places for this ineffable, and I was very much a product of the 60s and 70s and the hippie culture of the day and all that sort of thing. And I had read books by Ram Dass, who a very venerable and well-known spiritual teacher today, but back in the early days, some of his writings and talks, and read some things about the Buddha and different Eastern philosophies and mysticisms, trying to get an explanation for what this experience is about.
Yeah.
And it was really, my own root faith background that gave me a personal sensation of being connected.
Yeah.
And so going deeper introspectively, beyond self.
Yeah, so you didn't particularly reject what you've done in the past. So it just Buddhism was added to that. Was that how you saw it? You were attracted to Buddhism, but you didn't feel you had to leave or go back on what had happened
Oh, no,
previously?
that's a difficult question, David,
Yeah,
because it was been a few decades later that the realization or the acceptance
yeah,
of the idea of I'm a Buddhist came into my mind.
yeah,
It was very difficult um, coming through not the spiritual sensation of awakening, but the religious conditioning of Christianity um, made it very difficult for me to accept
yeah,
another. It's not another belief system. We'll get to that later.
yeah. Okay.
But yeah, it's not like you just jump, change horses in midstream or something like that.
Yeah, from the point of view of beginners to Buddhism, and I put myself in that category. I'm very interested, and I'm gaining a lot from Buddhist teaching that are very much at the start of that, and keen to continue. What advice would you give to someone like myself or others who may feel that same way? They want to know a lot more and go deeply into Buddhism. Is there a particular method, or how would you advise someone who was in that situation? They're interested, but where to go from there? What would be the best way, in your opinion?
If someone was interested in Buddhism, I would begin encouraging them in their own introspection to begin asking the questions about their own sensory experience, their own consciousness, their own belief in a personal self.
Yeah,
Only if a person is asking about Buddhism. If a person is inquiring from whatever faith tradition they're in, I would encourage them in that to stay within their own faith tradition.
right.
I would not encourage them to change.
But
In Buddhism, there's nothing to convert to. You're already a human being,
yeah,
and this consciousness is arising out of an ineffable, nameless space within us that is not identified
yeah,
by any kind of belief system or something like that.
yeah,
So we're not encouraging people to intellectually learn about Buddhism or add more concepts to themselves,
yeah.
and to find some realization.
Right. And from not an outsider, I suppose it is an outsider in a sense, just in a learning situation, but I know you trained in Zen for several years, and again from the beginner's point of view, that there's Buddhism, but there are different disciplines. How would you describe that, and Zen in particular? What drew you to Zen in particular, or were you studying other aspects of Buddhism as well? But I know you spent quite a long time
I had become serious about meditation because what as I wrote to you in my letter, I went for some time actually practicing nothing.
Yeah.
And there was still a sense of this introspection. I would take sacred writings, mostly from the Christian tradition, and not try to grasp them as ideas, but try to get as close to living the experience of it as I could.
Yeah.
For example, the well-known concept of love your neighbor as yourself. That's a huge thing.
Yeah.
That takes a lot of energy and a lot of attention. So I'd watch my mind and my own sense of beingness. What is it that takes my attention off of that?
Right.
Or the power or the willingness to live that? as a momentary experience.
Yeah.
So I realized I was sort of practicing a kind of contemplation or meditation already,
Right.
and becoming more successful, if you want to use the word successful, but more intimate with that, working within that sensation or working within that realization. The more comfortable I became with it, the more determined and willing I was to open myself to other contemplative forms of life. So it seemed like serendipitously things would come along, just little remarks, like I would see bumper stickers on cars that said, "Breathe, you're alive." So I would work with that expression.
Yeah.
Things from the Tao Te Ching.
Yeah.
I was working in a very frenetic and stressful job at the time, and something from the Tao Te Ching I saw on a calendar caught my mind. And it said that there's one who does nothing, yet leaves nothing unaccomplished.
Right.
And I got an insight into that.
Yeah.
And it was an idea that there's an energy, there's a presence working within us that's already here. That's a relationship. It's a relationship with life itself. And the more we can attune ourselves with that, or the more we can move with the vitality of that, the easier life gets. The easier it is to be a human being.
How would you describe, again for beginners, how would you describe Zen? Is there something in Zen that isn't in other forms of Buddhism? I know there's a lot of common ground.
Yeah, so I got, I did diverge, I guess, from the question a little bit. But Zen was a discipline someone suggested to me. I went to my very first meditation retreat, and I spoke to one of the practitioners there who seemed to be pretty experienced with that. He suggested that I go to the Zen Center that's close to me. And I began sitting with them and practicing with them, because the Zen was more of a stripped down model, if you will. It didn't rely so much on concepts and ideas, and didn't involve a lot of rituals and regalia, although it does have its own rituals and regalia. But it's a very stark and simplistic practice in and of itself. Mm-hmm. And throughout my previous religious life and religious programming, if you will, there was always this sense of, gaining more ideas and gaining more concepts, learning more Bible verses, remembering more sayings, and sort of having a dualistic admiration of ideas and words that sometimes faith-based religion can be an admiration of something that's outside of us, something that's purely just aspirations or appreciations for wisdom. But I was looking for something more palpable and vital in my daily experience. And I had an awakening, if you will, of sorts, where everything stopped, and there was a clarity, there was a peace, there was a pureness of sentience that I had not experienced before. And so I went to Zen because I didn't want to add anything to that. I wanted to stabilize my ability to stay in that state of being, if you will.
Yeah.
And the Zen discipline enabled me to do that. A lot of beginners approach meditation with the idea that I've got to stop my mind. Well, my mind had already stopped, and I had seen into this well of stillness that I won't choose to identify right now in the conversation. But there was a well of stillness that I'd never seen or experienced before. And I was practicing to go back into that rather than trying to cultivate something to create it. I was trying to stay in it, to remain in it, to be able to touch it. And Zen really helped me to stabilize that vision. So the first thing you learn as a meditator is that there's all this activity, there's all this motion, there's always all this mental interaction or ground noise, ground clutter, sort of, to speak of. So people say, well, I can't meditate. My mind is full of this noise. I can't keep my attention on anything. And that's the very first suggestion, the very first invitation to the idea that you are the observer and not what is being observed.
Yeah.
That you're the space in which all that activity is being seen. And so Zen, for me, helped me to break down that dichotomy between the seer or the observer and the observed.
Yeah. And you became involved with a Buddhist community in Western North Carolina, which became the Embracing Simplicity Contemplative Order. What could you tell us about that community that you were involved with for some time?
I realized at a point that to stabilize my insight and to live a simpler life, so to speak, there's a whole lot of energy going out of one person to sustain one person in the world. So I felt it would be more appropriate to belong to a community.
Yeah.
Here in the United States, everyone has their own lawnmower and their own car or 2 or 3 cars, and we all have all this stuff and all this. We go through all this energy and work to sustain all of these things. And so I believe in getting closer to life. You become simpler. It's not found in something out there, but it's found in taking things away. So at this point, I decided that living in a community and sharing was a better way of life, and I began to seek intentional communities. And I heard about a monk that was starting an intentional community with spiritual values out in the middle of the United States, and I hadn't been able to make the journey to get out there. But then I heard that monk was coming to North Carolina.
Right.
And so it was another occurrence of serendipity that I was able to go to this retreat and spend some time with this monk. And to make a long story short, this is a very, very long story.
We have plenty of time.
We're just practicing. I found the things right here in North Carolina that I needed, rather than go with this fellow, this monk who was starting this thing from scratch, which was a very appealing idea to me, to start from scratch. And he did start from scratch. He had several acres of land, and he's now built a viable Dharma center there, and his teaching ministry spreading around the world. And I'm very happy for him. But at that time, there was nothing. He was starting from scratch. And so, well, these guys here in North Carolina, they have their own situation already going. So I'm going to stick with these folks. They're closer by.
Okay.
And so we had a lot of good retreats together over the years, a lot of interesting spiritual practitioners or curious people from different backgrounds came through, and lots of monks from different temples and countries came through, and eventually we developed a teacher training program, and I went through that teacher training program, as did some others, and it was very much based on the Theravada tradition.
Yeah, that's
based on the earliest recorded. Buddhism was an oral tradition, of course, but early on Buddhism got its own scriptures, if you will, and these represent the earliest verbal teachings of the Buddha. And so Theravada tradition is based on that, and it gives a very articulated process of spiritual inquiry.
right.
And many people have probably heard of the Four Noble Truths, the Eightfold Path, and these types of breathing meditation and mindfulness, all of these things that are becoming more well known in our culture now were very much had their origination in the earliest teachings of Siddhartha Gautama, who became the Buddha.
So you're described as a non-monastic minister in Buddhism. So you're not actually a monk, is that right?
It's a peculiar situation to be in. Really, the only difference between my situation and that of a novice monk is that I don't have the celibacy vow.
Right. So you're a family man, aren't you? I read you have your children, grandchildren.
It's more like being a teacher at large.
Yeah.
And in our particular contemplative order, we have some requirements about what we wear, and there's a code of conduct, and that's also rooted very much in the same code of conduct that's there for fully ordained monks.
Yeah, and you're regularly you offer workshops in Buddhism. Is that from a beginner stage or wherever that person are at?
I do spiritual direction from a number of different viewpoints. From the interspiritual viewpoint, I try to introduce people from wherever they're coming from. If they're coming from a faith tradition or no tradition at all, I focus on the aspect of what is a contemplative life, what are the benefits of a contemplative life, and how to begin asking the questions that lead to awakening, and teach. I don't like to call them techniques. It's more of a technology.
Yeah.
But just to apply the principles of Buddhism in a very non-sectarian way, that's one way that I approach teaching. Then the other way is within the very context of Buddhism and teaching those well-articulated processes that the Buddha used in his own awakening. That's one way we do that. I like weekend workshops. It's good for people. It's good for people who have lives and families and a working life and all that. They can come to a meeting on Friday night and spend, that whole Saturday trying different practices and just using that as a refuge and a place where they can experience a taste of contemplative life that way. And I also speak different, topically in various situations as that arises. And the third way is that I'm committed to a study group of people who are committed to actually studying early Buddhist texts and some other things too as well, but primarily early Buddhist texts.
And you're preparing for establishments of a place in Mexico. What can you tell us about that? That's quite an exciting.
Yes, there's an eco-spiritual element to what I have a vision for, and there are some ancient sites in Mexico, some pre-Columbian pyramids and sacred sites, some sacred ecological places like there's some dormant volcanoes and a lot of things in close proximity. And I want to take people into the experience of contemplating the elements and awaken to the nature of their being by being in nature.
Right.
And so that opportunity is there. And it's also a very international zone that I'm going into, where visitors come from all over the world. It's a UNESCO World Heritage Site.
Yeah.
It's very much like an old world city of Europe, and it has that sort of old world culture. And a lot of people come from Italy, Germany, Japan, China, all over. So it's a very good opportunity at this crossroads that people could have a practice center,
right,
and enjoy the benefits of tourism, but also enjoy the benefits of spiritual retreat and gain some deeper experience with nature at the same time.
And what can you tell us about the Embracing Simplicity order? That was is that part of the Indian situation?
We got off track with that a little bit too, didn't we?
Yeah.
Embracing Simplicity Hermitage was the spiritual community that I was speaking of earlier. And you're going to have to restrain me sometimes, David, because I have a tendency to go off on
That's okay. That's fine. Just go with what you guided to do.
I go off topic some, but there's method to my madness.
It's not a problem at all.
Embracing Simplicity originally started out to be an intraspiritual center for people who wanted to embrace simplicity, if you will, by going into the contemplative life or tasting some aspect of the contemplative life or having some place that they can get to go to without having to become a monk or having to convert to some different religion, that they could come and experience the benefits of meditation for a short time, a day, a week, a month, or whatever it may be. But the more the community began to try to develop this vision, the clearer it became that it was much better to become rooted in the Buddhism that this grew out of, and to have an affiliation and a way to network with other spiritual communities around the world. And so some of us became monks, some of us became ordained spiritual teachers. Other people who came in or left the community in the earlier days went into other things like yoga and massage therapy, various kinds of helping things, that supportive kind of things. A lot of things developed out of that vision. So today, what Embracing Simplicity is it is a monastic order, but it's also an order of men and women lay people who are committed to the contemplative life, and to some degree or another. And there's the inward expression of that, where we turn our spiritual inquiry in to recognize the silent, ineffable, pure consciousness, the Buddha nature, if you will. But the realization of that is, the outward expression of that is that we're all connected, that we're all part of a one organism, and we're all present in the one place, the one time, the timeless now. And that connection causes us to have compassion, to have interest, to have a willingness to selflessly participate in the evolving of humanity. And sometimes that means social activism. working for social justice, working to relieve suffering. However, suffering may be manifested in the world, be it lack of water or political oppression or whatever it may be. So the Embracing Simplicity order, and also my work, Contemplative Traditions, has the end of suffering at its heart, because that's the Buddha's purest expression of the Buddhist message. If there's a Buddhist message, is that we're here to learn to relieve our suffering first, and then be capable and willing to relieve the suffering of others.
Right. As you know, we're discussing a project where you're going to be doing some regular classes for us. How do you see that going? What are your thoughts on what we're going to do, or what you're going, how that will develop?
I want to support individuals in their spiritual inquiry, and that's a very constructive, intuitive method for doing that, for looking into oneself, to discovering that sacredness, if you want to use the word sacredness, divinity, the different names that we try to apply to this essence of being.
Yeah.
In a very structured kind of way. To be supportive of that.
Yeah. So, if there, would that be talking about maybe the historical aspects of Buddhism, or just dealing with ourselves as we are right now, and where our path is leading?
Yes, I don't think. Let me say this. Think of how to say this. Thinking is a problem for us.
Yeah, we do too much.
And words often fall short as tools. The tools that we have, if we want to call it grace, I think it's a very universal way of looking at it, grace.
Yeah, great word.
As a very palpable energy that's present in the being, in yourself, in myself, and all the other participants in this great program, to become more aware of that grace as a palpable experience, a palpable energy that's not something abstract outside themselves. And it's not something that you need to add a lot of new concepts or to understand historical backgrounds or different psychologies. It's more about removing those things, or getting those things, at least temporarily suspend those things or transcend those things, so that clear seeing is possible.
Yeah.
And when I say clear seeing, I'm not talking about an intellectual intelligence, but the very vitality that we already have as human beings. Our body is resonating with the rest of our environment, and that information is being encoded on our cells. Those messages then go to our brain, and with that contact, consciousness causes thoughts to precipitate in our mind, and then we interpret that experience, and the narrative of that interpretation becomes who we believe we are, moment by moment. So if we can back that process up step by step, it's kind of like taking a reel of film, a movie film, and unrolling the movie film and looking at it frame by frame. So that event that looked like it happened in just a moment actually took place in many frames of existence, if you will. And so we are capturing these moments in our being. Once I heard someone said one time that if you want to know the subconscious, just know the body. That the body is the subconscious, because life imprints these impressions on us. So sometimes when we enter into this sort of practice, things come up, things that sometimes are pleasant or unpleasant, or maybe we have no sensation or awareness of them at all. Those three different kinds of feelings all still have intention and volition as potentiality within them, as human consciousness. So we're going to back the film up, if you will. We're going to look at the film frame by frame, and we're going to learn intuitively, not adding new concepts or new beliefs, but just learning to live with our own sensibilities in a more kind and attentive way.
Yeah. And that's because a lot of... I've read some and listened to some Buddhist teachings, and they talk a wonderful expression, as you know, mindfulness. Thich Nhat Hanh speaks about that very eloquently, to be mindfully walking or mindfully doing whatever. So we're not rushing to do something. We're experiencing each step of the way. Was that?
Yes, mindfulness. Yes, mindfulness is the beginning. And in the Buddha's instruction, the very first thing he tells us, he says, put away the cares and the anxieties of the world and notice the breathing. So that's something we're capable of doing in our own energy, without any knowledge, without any training. We can start at that very point. And with each breath, with the in-breath and the out-breath, find the space between those breaths. Often we think of, there's the past, and then there's the future, and then there's this little sliver of time between the past and the future called now. And when we watch our breath, we watch the in-breath, watch the out-breath. Can we find that place where the in-breath and the out-breath change places?
Yeah.
That place is called now. And when we learn to find that place, then who is the observer and what is being observed?
Yeah. Well, some would call it living in the present moment, but we're talking about the same thing, aren't we, really?
Yes, yes. So when we look at this, when we look at life from this point of view, all these concepts change, all these things that we take for granted in the conventional sense, in our conventional way of thinking. And that in itself is an end of suffering.
Yeah.
Because we're not grasping the perceived world as tightly. We're not investing as much of our beingness into phenomenal experiences.
Yeah. And there are many similarities, as you know, the channel and the organisation that Sean heads. It's based on the life of St. Francis, and it's very much how can I serve. But from the teachings I've listened to from Pema Chodron and Thich Nhat Hanh, it's others wanting those things for yourself, but also for others. And it's I find very compassionate attitude, and something that really attracts me to Buddhism. And there's something about that really, there are other people in different traditions that would have a similar concept, but sometimes there are more similarities than we realise sometimes between the various traditions. But St. Francis, I can see some Buddhist principles in the life of St. Francis.
Of course, yes, because we're seeing this, regardless of what tradition it is, we're seeing it from that place of personal experience. of who is the experiencer.
Mm.
And we've been gifted with a powerful, this very life, this body, this consciousness moving through us is very, very powerful and fascinating and mysterious and wonderful experience.
So much unrealized potential.
So much, yeah. So we want to give that as much loving attention as possible. Mm-hmm. And if we're able to do that with ourselves as an individual person, and treat the positive things and the negative things with equanimity, and look at them in a kind and introspective, accepting way, then we're cultivating something that can be shared with all human beings, because everybody has that desire to be free from anxiety, to be free from pain. And
working to the ending of suffering is a wonderful concept, isn't it? It's a lifetime journey.
Yes.
And that is something that probably I still need to understand a lot more about, the Buddhist attitude to reincarnation and lifetimes. And it's something I won't say I'm struggling with, but I'm not sure what I feel. But I'm open to, and I have an enormous amount of respect for every belief. But it's something that I've yet defined in myself of what's life after death or reincarnation, that sort of thing. I don't know personally, but obviously Buddhist, from what I know about Buddhism.
Well, perhaps we should ask the question: is there life before death?
I don't know, turn it around, yeah.
Yes, because consciousness, or the vitality in the universe is pervasive. There's pervasive energy, life, consciousness. Let's use those words right now.
Yeah. It's
pervasive. And we see things in a very static way. We can look at a tree, for example, and what we're really looking at when we look at the trees, we're looking at the past. You can chop the tree down or take the branches apart or pull the leaves off of it and try to discover what is the essence of this thing called a tree. But when you take apart those parts, you can't find anything.
Yeah.
You can't find that living vitality. But yet there's a consciousness and a sensibility and a sacredness of being that's there, that's expressing itself, and that's expressing itself throughout the universe in myriads of forms.
Right. So are there any misunderstandings about Buddhism that you're aware of that people would...
Well, I think that reincarnation is a very popular theme or sticking point for people. I choose to excuse me. I choose to discuss it in terms of rebirth. We are living in the continuum of what is called the now. And that small sliver of time by what is the perceived past and the perceived future, but really there's only ever the now. There's only ever now. You're only ever now. And birth, we believe that the sense of I came with the birth. And the sense of I took on various the sense of I came and took on various identifications and associations, a personal psychology, education, belief system, gender, astrological sign, began to take on all these things. And then it was young, it was middle-aged, it was old, it became sick, and then it passed away. So we say that I was all those things wave of phenomenon that occurred, like a wave on an ocean. We can look at the wave on the ocean and understand that at what point did it become, when we started calling it a wave, the water began to raise up, and then we could see a point where we could definitively call it a wave, and then it gradually disappeared, but yet all the while it remained as water, as its true nature.
Yeah.
Its true nature was the ocean. So as we take on identifications and they feel very solid to us, we get the idea that this is me, this is myself, this is I, and it only happens in that small frame of experience that we place between birth and death, or we place between the past and the future. So these are concepts that we want to hold very loosely, but we can also apply as we look at other ideas of that come from other faith traditions as well about rebirth.
Yeah.
When a Christian has a realization that Christ is living within them and that they are no longer themselves, but they're identified with Christ, they're dead and they're buried with Christ and raised in a new life as a fresh expression of God, if you will.
Yeah. And
this is very similar, if you will, to what happens on a moment-to-moment basis.
Yeah.
We live and die by the things we hold on to. And so what Buddhism addresses is the propensity that we have to identify and maintain attachment. And the Buddhist strategy is to go directly to answer the questions that go directly to that propensity, to break that chain of rebirth, if you will.
Yeah.
Say, when we become angry, we say, I'm angry. Well, you are not anger. Anger is a phenomenon that's occurring in your experience that you're identifying with. And at the moment, it feels very strong to you. And your mind and your sensual being inhabits that. And if you hold on to that and inhabit that, yes, that becomes your experience. You're born into the world of anger, if you want to look at it that way. And so the longer you carry that experience in linear time, the more. Here's another Buddhist idea, if you want to call it a Buddhist idea, of karma, or kama, as we say in the Pali tradition, that everything happens with a cause and everything has a condition. So if we hold on to our anger and we carry it in a way that we're born in a linear existence of being angry, the beingness of anger, then the reverberations and the reoccurring experiences that we create from that go out into the universe and come back. They return to us. So then there's that reincarnation. We're reincarnating as anger. The longer I hold on to my anger, the longer I believe in the sensation of anger being me, and I'm identifying with it, then I continue to reincarnate or embody it. We're re-embodying anger by holding on to that experience. So we need to learn that experiences are very ephemeral, that a personal identity is both something that is phenomenal, and it's not permanent.
Yeah.
And there's dissatisfaction. There's a potential of dissatisfaction in every aspect a phenomenal experience.
Yeah, I feel very strongly that an area where there's a lot of common ground between traditions is meditation. That how important it is, and that's a very important aspect of Buddhism, isn't it? I don't know how differently they approach it from maybe other faiths or other traditions, but I think we all agree on the importance of it. That's something.
It is important. It's important to cultivate the recognition and to be able to follow, the attention.
Yeah.
Or rather, that's probably a less accurate way to put it, is to realize that we're the awareness, we're the space in which the attention is having its play.
Yeah. I think we're probably coming to the end of the broadcast for tonight. Is there anything else you'd like to share with us before in the last minute or so?
Good. This is good practice. Yes, I would just like to invite as many people as possible, not just to hear the words, or just practice looking at the sensibility that they have of what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Don't just hear the words and like or dislike the ideas, but get a sense of your own energy of being and how much investment that you're making in this conversation, whether you like or dislike my words, or whether you're indifferent to what I'm saying.
Yeah.
There are three possible scenarios or responses that you could have.
Yeah.
And you can call it meditation if you want. You don't have to call it anything at all. But just take time. This is your own sacredness and your own moment of grace and your own now. We talked earlier in the conversation about having a moment. You know, what were moments in my life that caused me to recognize this?
Yeah.
And the moment is now. It's always here.
Yeah.
So take this moment to recognize the power of grace working in your own heart, and sense intuitively the energy and vitality that's working in you, whether you like what I'm saying, whether you dislike what I'm saying, whether you're completely indifferent to what I'm saying.
Okay, so I'm really looking forward to this future times when you can share some Buddhist teachings with us. So just wanted to thank you for being with us today.
Thank you. I'm pleased to share.
And we'll look forward to the next time and to go further into the world of Buddhism.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dhammaji, for your time today.